Have you ever wondered what really happens behind closed doors when the U.S. government is on the brink of shutting down? Imagine being in the room where two powerful forces collide, a president demanding loyalty and a Congress deeply divided. The fate of an entire nation hangs in the balance, with just hours remaining before government services grind to a halt. Today, we're taking you inside the halls of power during one of America's most intense political showdowns. You'll witness the high-stakes negotiation, the personal conflicts, and the impossible choices faced by those in power, all while improving your English vocabulary through an immersive story experience. This isn't just politics. It's a human drama of ambition, principle, and the messy reality of democracy in action. Welcome to Story-Driven English, where we transform current events and fascinating topics into engaging narratives designed to supercharge your English learning. I'm host name, and today's story will transport you to Washington, D.C. during a critical moment that reveals how America's government really works. Before we dive in, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and notification bell right now. Our channel brings you weekly story-based English lessons that make learning natural, enjoyable, and incredibly effective. Join our community of over English learners who are improving their language skills through the power of storytelling. Now, let's step into the corridors of power as a government shutdown looms and a nation holds its breath. Congressional Deadlock. The battle over the budget. It was a crisp April evening in Washington, D.C. The cherry blossoms along the Potomac had begun to fade, their delicate petals scattered across the marble steps of government buildings. Inside the illuminated dome of the Capitol, tension hung in the air like the lingering humidity of an approaching summer storm. Representative Marcus Thornton adjusted his tie as he walked briskly through the halls of Congress, his footsteps echoing against the polished floors. As a freshman congressman from Ohio, he had arrived in Washington with high hopes and even higher ideals. 6 months into his term, those ideals were being tested in ways he had never anticipated. Another late night ahead, his chief of staff, Eliza Watson, remarked as she matched his stride, clutching a binder full of voting statistics and constituent letters. The budget proposal is going to the floor in an hour. Marcus nodded grimly. This is the third attempt this month. If we can't pass something today, we're looking at a shutdown by next week. The congressional cafeteria was buzzing with activity. Representatives and staffers huddled in small groups, their voices a blend of hushed whispers and occasional bursts of emphatic declarations. Marcus spotted his colleague, Representative Diana Chan from California, sitting alone at a corner table, intently studying documents spread before her. "Mind if we join you?" Marcus asked, approaching her table. Diana looked up, pushing her glasses back up the bridge of her nose. "Please do. I've been going over the Republican budget proposal one more time, trying to decide how to vote." Marcus slid into the chair across from her. "And it's fundamentally flawed," Diana replied, sliding a document toward him. "Look at these projections. They've drastically underestimated the economic impact of the proposed tariffs. The Congressional Budget Office estimates show a potential revenue shortfall of billions." Eliza leaned forward. "But if we don't pass something, the government shuts down in 5 days. President Trump has made it clear he won't sign anything that doesn't include his priority funding." As they spoke, the cafeteria door swung open, and Speaker of the House Mike Johnson entered, surrounded by a small entourage of advisors and security. The room quieted momentarily, a ripple of awareness spreading through the gathered lawmakers. The speaker looked tired, the weight of leadership etched in the lines of his face. "He hasn't had it easy," Diana murmured, watching Johnson make his way to a private dining room. "Trying to unify the Republican Party right now is like herding cats. The Freedom Caucus wants deeper cuts. The moderates are worried about their re-election prospects if government services are interrupted, and somehow he needs to find a path through that satisfies the president." Marcus had only spoken with Speaker Johnson a handful of times, usually brief exchanges during votes or committee meetings. But he had heard the stories from more seasoned representatives, Johnson working late into the night, personally calling members, trying to build consensus for legislation that could actually pass. "I don't envy his position," Marcus admitted. "The Republican majority is thin, and they can only afford to lose a handful of votes before they need Democratic support." "Which they won't get on this proposal," Diana added. "Not with the current immigration and environmental provisions." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Representative Jackson Williams, a veteran lawmaker from Texas and chairman of the Powerful Ways and Means Committee. Williams was known for his direct approach and institutional knowledge, having served through multiple administrations. "Evening, colleagues," Williams greeted them, setting down his coffee mug. "Ready for the floor show? Is that what we're calling democratic governance these days?" Diana replied with a wry smile. Williams chuckled. "When it's this dysfunctional. Absolutely." He turned to Marcus. "How's the freshman experience treating you, Thornton?" "It's been educational," Marcus replied carefully. "Though I didn't expect to be facing a government shutdown 6 months in." "Get used to it," Williams said, lowering his voice. "This is the new normal in Washington. Governing by crisis. Johnson's proposal is going to fail tonight. Our whip count shows at least 20 Republicans planning to vote against it, and that's before we count a single Democrat." Eliza looked alarmed. 20? That's more than I've heard reported. Williams nodded. "The hardliners think it doesn't cut enough. The moderates think it cuts too much. And the leadership is caught in the middle, desperately trying to find a formula that works." He took a sip of his coffee. "Meanwhile, the president keeps changing his demands, making Johnson's job nearly impossible." As they continued their discussion, Marcus found himself thinking about his constituents back in Ohio. The federal employees at the regional EPA office, the contractors working on infrastructure projects, the families dependent on various government services. A shutdown wouldn't just be a political failure. It would have real consequences for real people. The warning bells began to sound, signaling that the House session would reconvene in 15 minutes. The representatives gathered their materials, preparing to return to the chamber. "Whatever happens tonight," Williams said as they walked toward the exit, "remember that this is just one act in a longer drama. The real question is what comes next. What happens when this plan fails? Does Johnson have a backup strategy? Will the president shift his position? Or are we headed for a prolonged shutdown?" The House chamber was nearly full when they arrived, representatives filing in from various meetings and dinners. The gallery above was crowded with journalists and visitors, all aware they might be witnessing a significant moment in this congressional session. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation and anxiety. Speaker Johnson called the session to order, his gavel cutting through the ambient noise. The House will come to order. The clerk will report the pending business. Marcus settled into his assigned seat, surveying the chamber. Along party lines, representatives clustered in informal groups, engaging in last-minute discussions and negotiations. Across the aisle, Marcus spotted the Democratic whip moving from member to member, confirming their opposition votes. On the Republican side, several factions were evident. The Tea Party members in one corner, moderates in another, leadership loyalists surrounding the Speaker's podium. As the clerk read the title of the budget resolution, Johnson's expression remained stoic, betraying none of the pressure he must have been feeling. The debate proceeded along predictable lines, Republicans emphasizing fiscal responsibility and presidential priorities, Democrats criticizing cuts to social programs and environmental protections. Representative Harriet Fletcher, a senior Republican from Wyoming, took the podium. This budget reflects the mandate our president received from the American people, she declared, her voice firm. We cannot continue the reckless spending of previous administrations. We must secure our borders, protect American industry, and restore fiscal sanity to Washington. When she yielded the floor, Democratic Minority Leader Congressman James Everett rose to speak. My colleagues across the aisle speak of fiscal responsibility, yet this proposal would add trillions to the deficit through tax cuts that primarily benefit the wealthy. Meanwhile, it slashes funding for education, environmental protection, and health care. This is not a serious attempt at governance. It's a political statement that sacrifices the well-being of ordinary Americans. The debate continued for nearly 2 hours, with representatives from both parties making their cases. Marcus watched Speaker Johnson closely throughout the proceedings. The Speaker occasionally conferred with his deputies, their expressions growing increasingly concerned as the evening progressed. It was clear to everyone in the chamber that they were losing votes, not gaining them. Finally, the time came for the roll call vote. As names were called alphabetically, Marcus tracked the running tally. The pattern became clear early. While most Republicans supported the measure, a significant number were breaking ranks. Some conservative members were voting no because the cuts weren't deep enough. Others, representing more moderate districts, were voting against provisions they feared would harm their constituents. When the final vote was tallied, the result was unmistakable. The budget resolution had failed, with 212 votes against and only 198 in favor. 24 Republicans had joined all Democrats in opposition, a stinging rebuke to Speaker Johnson's leadership and President Trump's agenda. The gallery erupted in murmurs as Johnson gavelled the session closed. Representatives began filing out of the chamber, many already speaking to the press on their phones, crafting statements to explain their votes. Marcus remained in his seat for a moment, watching as Johnson conferred with his leadership team, their expressions grave. "This is unprecedented," Eliza whispered, leaning down from her staff position behind him. A Republican speaker failing to pass a Republican budget with a Republican president in office. Marcus nodded slowly. And now the countdown to a government shutdown really begins. Outside the chamber, the Capitol Rotunda was filled with reporters and staffers, all discussing the implications of the vote. Marcus navigated through the crowd, heading toward his office where he knew constituent calls would already be pouring in. Representative Thornton. A voice called out. He turned to see Catherine Reynolds, a respected veteran journalist from the Capitol Press Corps. "Do you have a comment on tonight's failed vote?" Marcus considered his response carefully. Tonight's vote demonstrates the complexity of governance. While there's broad agreement on the need for a responsible budget, there are genuine differences about what that means in practice. My hope is that this setback leads to more inclusive negotiations, not further entrenchment. Do you think a government shutdown is inevitable at this point? Reynolds pressed. Nothing is inevitable in politics, Marcus replied. But avoiding a shutdown will require flexibility and compromise from all sides, Congress and the White House included. As he continued toward his office, Marcus spotted Speaker Johnson standing alone in a quiet alcove, phone pressed to his ear. From Johnson's expression and body language, it was clear he was speaking with the president, and the conversation was not going well. The following morning dawned with Washington in crisis mode. News programs featured wall-to-wall coverage of the failed vote and speculation about the path forward. Marcus arrived at his office early, joining his staff for a briefing on overnight developments. The president tweeted at 5:30 this morning, Eliza reported, displaying the message on her tablet. Weak Republicans betrayed the American people last night. I won't sign any budget that doesn't fully fund border security and protect American jobs. If Congress can't do its job, maybe a shutdown will focus their minds. Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. Not exactly the conciliatory tone we might have hoped for. Speaker Johnson has called an emergency conference meeting at 10 a.m., his legislative director added. Word is he's going to present a revised proposal with some modifications to win over the holdouts. The Republican conference room was packed when Marcus arrived. The atmosphere was tense, with evident divisions among the members. Some were clustered in tight groups, speaking in hushed tones. Others sat in stony silence, arms crossed defensively. Speaker Johnson entered last, flanked by the majority leader and whip. "Good morning," Johnson began, his voice steady despite the obvious strain. "I won't sugarcoat this. Last night was a setback, but our responsibility to govern remains. The American people elected us to lead, not to preside over a government shutdown." A representative from Georgia interrupted. "With all due respect, Mr. Speaker, the American people also elected President Trump, and his priorities should be our priorities." "I'm well aware of the president's position," Johnson replied evenly. "I spoke with him at length last night and again this morning. But I would remind everyone in this room that we are a co-equal branch of government. Our constitutional duty is to exercise our own judgment while respecting the executive's role." For the next hour, Johnson outlined a revised proposal, one that maintained most of the president's priorities but included modifications designed to win over reluctant members. Border security funding remained, but with more flexibility in how it would be implemented. Tariff revenue projections were adjusted to reflect more realistic economic analyses. Some of the most controversial environmental regulation rollbacks were softened. "This won't satisfy everyone," Johnson concluded. "It certainly doesn't satisfy me in every respect. But perfect cannot be the enemy of good enough, especially with a shutdown deadline approaching. I need to know if this is something you can support. The discussion that followed was heated. Conservative members accused Johnson of capitulating. Moderates worried the changes didn't go far enough. Through it all, the Speaker maintained his composure, addressing concerns directly and occasionally reminding members of the political consequences of a shutdown. As the meeting was concluding, Marcus noticed a message from Diana on his phone: "Democrats holding our own strategy session. Leadership suggesting we might support a clean continuing resolution if Johnson abandons some of Trump's demands." This presented a potential alternative path. Instead of trying to unify Republicans around a partisan proposal, Johnson could work with Democrats on a compromise that would keep the government open. But such a move would risk the president's wrath and potentially Johnson's speakership. The next 3 days unfolded in a blur of negotiations, press conferences, and late-night sessions. Speaker Johnson tried multiple approaches, alternating between cajoling reluctant Republicans and exploring potential openings with Democrats. President Trump remained firm in his public statements, though rumors circulated about private concessions he might be willing to make. On the fourth day, with the shutdown deadline just 24 hours away, Johnson called Marcus to his office. This was unexpected. As a freshman representative, Marcus wasn't typically included in high-level leadership discussions. "Thornton, come in," Johnson greeted him, waving away his chief of staff to ensure privacy. The speaker looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes testament to sleepless nights. "I've been watching your work on the Budget Committee. You've shown a thoughtful approach that's increasingly rare around here." "Thank you, Mr. Speaker," Marcus replied, surprised by the compliment. Johnson leaned forward in his chair. "I'm going to be blunt because time is short. We have 3 options, none of them good. Option 1, we try again with the Republican-only approach, which has failed twice now. Option 2, I negotiate with Democrats, which might save the government from shutdown but would likely cost me the speakership. Option 3, we let the shutdown happen and hope public pressure eventually forces a resolution." Marcus considered this carefully. "What does the president say?" "The president," Johnson replied with a humorless smile, "continues to send mixed signals. His public statements remain inflexible, but his chief of staff has hinted that he might accept a face-saving compromise. The problem is, I can't risk moving forward on hints and suggestions." "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked. "Because I need allies who understand governance isn't just about ideological purity," Johnson answered. "Many of the members who've been here longer are entrenched in their positions. You're new enough to still see the bigger picture. If I decide to work with Democrats on a compromise, I'll need voices like yours to help explain that decision to our colleagues and constituents." Marcus left the Speaker's office with a new appreciation for the impossible situation Johnson faced. The man was trying to reconcile irreconcilable demands, from a president who wanted absolute loyalty, from party factions with opposing priorities, from a public that wanted both government services and fiscal restraint. That evening, news broke that Johnson had arranged a private meeting with Democratic leaders. Conservative media immediately erupted with accusations of betrayal, while moderates cautiously praised the Speaker's willingness to find a bipartisan solution. President Trump tweeted his dissatisfaction, Disappointing to see Republican leadership considering surrender on our key priorities. The American people deserve better. The Capitol buzzed with rumors of a potential motion to vacate, the procedure by which dissatisfied members could remove Johnson as Speaker. Such a move had been successful only once in modern history, but the threat loomed large in every calculation. On the final day before the shutdown deadline, Johnson called an emergency session of the House. As representatives filed into the chamber, speculation ran rampant about what the Speaker would propose. Had he struck a deal with Democrats? Would he make one final attempt at a Republican-only solution? Or would he simply acknowledge defeat and prepare the country for a shutdown? When Johnson took the podium, the chamber fell silent. "Members of the House," he began, his voice resolute, "our nation stands at a crossroads. In less than 12 hours, funding for essential government operations will expire. Federal employees will be furloughed. Services will be interrupted. Markets will react. And the American people will, rightfully, question our ability to govern." He paused, surveying the chamber. "I have spent the past week in virtually continuous negotiations with Republican colleagues across our conference's spectrum, with Democratic leadership, and with the White House. Those discussions have made one thing abundantly clear. There is no perfect solution that satisfies everyone's demands." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Johnson raised his hand for quiet. "Today, I am presenting a continuing resolution that will fund the government for 60 days at current levels. This temporary measure includes limited additional funding for border security modernization, but does not commit to the specific implementation methods the President has advocated. It maintains existing environmental regulations pending further review, rather than immediately rolling them back. And it establishes a bipartisan commission to address our long-term fiscal challenges." The reaction was immediate and divided. Conservative members shouted objections. Moderates and Democrats exchanged surprised glances. "This is not the proposal I wanted to bring forward," Johnson continued over the growing noise. "It falls short of many Republican priorities, including my own. But it is a proposal that can pass this House, receive consideration in the Senate, and potentially earn the President's signature. Most importantly, it keeps the government open while we continue working toward more comprehensive solutions." The debate that followed was among the most contentious Marcus had witnessed during his short time in Congress. Republican hardliners accused Johnson of capitulation and betrayal. Democrats questioned whether the limited border security funding represented a genuine compromise or a Trojan horse. Through it all, Johnson stood firm, responding to critiques with a calm determination that gradually won grudging respect even from some opponents. When the vote finally came, the atmosphere was electric. Representatives from both parties watched the tally closely, aware they were witnessing a pivotal moment in contemporary American governance. The final count, 275 in favor, 155 opposed, revealed an unusual coalition. A majority of Democrats joined by just enough moderate Republicans to push the measure across the finish line. Speaker Johnson had prevented a government shutdown, but at significant political cost. Nearly half of his Republican conference had voted against him, and conservative media was already calling for his resignation. The question now was whether the Senate would pass the measure and, more crucially, whether President Trump would sign it. Marcus found Johnson alone in his ceremonial office after the vote, staring out the window toward the Washington Monument. "Congratulations, Mr. Speaker," Marcus offered tentatively. Johnson turned, his expression a complex mix of relief and resignation. "On preventing a shutdown? Perhaps. On preserving Republican unity? Hardly." He gestured for Marcus to take a seat. "The President called. He's unhappy, as expected, but his advisers are urging him to sign the resolution rather than own a shutdown. He'll probably do it, but with a signing statement criticizing Congress and promising to fight harder next time." "And your speakership?" Marcus asked. Johnson shrugged. "We'll see. There will almost certainly be a motion to vacate filed by week's end. Whether it has the votes to succeed depends on how many of our colleagues prioritize stability over ideological purity." He glanced at his watch. "The Senate is voting within the hour. Barring surprises, the resolution should be on the President's desk by midnight." As Marcus left the Capitol that evening, he reflected on the week's events. The budget battle had revealed deep fractures within American governance, between parties, within parties, between branches of government. Speaker Johnson had navigated these treacherous waters with as much skill as possible, but the underlying conflicts remained unresolved. The next morning, news broke that President Trump had indeed signed the continuing resolution, avoiding a shutdown. His accompanying statement was predictably critical of Congress but stopped short of directly attacking Johnson. Political analysts debated whether this represented a strategic retreat or simply a postponement of the inevitable confrontation. For his part, Marcus gained a new understanding of the complex realities of governance. The idealistic vision of public service that had brought him to Washington still motivated him, but it was now tempered by practical recognition of the structural and personal challenges that made progress so difficult. A week later, as predicted, a motion to vacate the Speaker's chair was filed by a group of conservative Republicans. The vote failed, with Democrats and moderate Republicans rallying to Johnson's defense, but the margin was uncomfortably close. The Speaker would continue leading the House, but with his authority diminished and the same fundamental divisions unresolved. The budget crisis had been averted for now, but the deeper political crisis continued. As Marcus explained to his constituents in a town hall the following weekend, "In Washington today, we aren't just disagreeing about policies. We're disagreeing about the very process of governance itself. Finding a path forward will require more than just compromise on specific issues. It will require rebuilding a shared understanding of how our democratic institutions are supposed to function." The cherry blossoms along the Potomac had fully faded by then, their brief moment of beauty giving way to the green leaves of summer. Like the blossoms, the momentary clarity provided by the budget crisis would soon be obscured by new controversies and challenges. But for those paying attention, the fundamental lesson remained clear. In a divided government, leadership means making difficult choices with incomplete information and accepting that perfect solutions are rarely possible. As the 60-day continuing resolution's expiration approached, Washington prepared for another round of the same battle. Speaker Johnson began quiet consultations with members of both parties, searching for a more durable solution. President Trump issued new demands through social media, and the American people watched with a mixture of frustration and resignation, wondering if their government would ever move beyond governance by crisis. In his office overlooking the National Mall, Marcus Thornton reviewed constituent correspondence about the budget fight, drafted responses explaining his votes, and prepared for the challenges ahead. The learning curve of his first year in Congress had been steep, but he was beginning to understand the rhythms and realities of Washington. More importantly, he was developing the resilience needed to persist in the face of systemic dysfunction, holding on to his ideals while accepting the necessity of pragmatic compromise. The budget battle had been resolved for now, but the deeper struggle for functional governance continued. It was, Marcus reflected, the central challenge of American democracy in an age of polarization, finding ways to bridge divides not just between competing policies, but between competing visions of how democracy itself should work. Key vocabulary, repeated throughout. A budget resolution, a formal statement of government spending priorities passed by Congress that guides the federal budget process. A government shutdown, the closure of non-essential federal government offices and services when Congress fails to appropriate funds. A continuing resolution, CR, a temporary funding measure that allows the government to continue operating when a formal budget hasn't been approved. A caucus, a group of members within a political party who share similar ideological positions. A whip count, the process of counting expected votes before a formal vote takes place. A roll call vote, a voting method where each legislator's name is called, and their vote is recorded. A fiscal responsibility, the principle of prudent management of government finances and resources. A bipartisan, involving cooperation or agreement between two political parties. A motion to vacate, a parliamentary procedure to remove the Speaker of the House from their position. A co-equal branch, the concept that the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government have equal power and authority. Appropriations, the process by which Congress authorizes spending for specific government functions. A furlough, temporary unpaid leave for government employees during a shutdown. A partisan, strongly supporting a particular political party or cause. A moderate, a person with political opinions that are not extreme, falling between conservative and liberal positions. A hardliner, someone who maintains an uncompromising, extreme position on political issues. A constituent, a citizen represented by an elected official. A leadership, the senior members of a political party who guide policy and strategy in Congress. A markup, the process of debating, amending, and rewriting proposed legislation in committee. A compromise, an agreement reached by mutual concession. A mandate, the authority granted by voters to carry out specific policies. Thank you for joining us for today's story about the complex world of American politics and budget negotiations. We hope this narrative has not only improved your English vocabulary and comprehension, but also provided insights into how the U.S. government functions during times of political division. Stories like this one help us understand complex topics while naturally absorbing new vocabulary in context. Did you notice how terms like government shutdown, budget resolution, and bipartisan were used throughout the narrative? This is the power of story-driven learning. If you found this story helpful for your English learning journey, please don't forget to thumbs up like this video to help others discover it. Speech balloon comment below with any words or phrases you found challenging or interesting. Bell subscribe to Story-Driven English for more stories that combine language learning with current events and interesting topics. Counterclockwise arrows button. Share this video with friends who are also learning English or interested in American politics. On our channel, we transform news and current events into engaging narratives that help you improve your English vocabulary, listening comprehension, and cultural understanding. Each week, we bring you new stories from around the world, carefully crafted to enhance your language skills. Is there a specific news topic or story you'd like us to cover next? Let us know in the comments. Remember, consistent practice is the key to language mastery. Join our growing community of English learners at Story Driven English, where we learn through the power of storytelling. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in our next Story Driven English lesson.